All right, I'm going to go through our agenda really quickly. So first we're going to do a quick overview of CPQ by going through some of the benefits of implementing a tool like CPQ. Next, we'll go into some of the challenges that we've seen throughout our CPQ implementations. We'll then go into our 5 optimization tips. A lot of those are based on those challenges that we're going to walk you guys through. So I'll go through those tips, and then I will pass over to Michael to do a quick CPQ demo as well. We'll show you some of those tips in action, and then he will pass back to me and we'll do some Q&A at the end. So as Linda mentioned, please post as many questions as you guys have in that question chat. Okay, benefits of CPQ. So the first one we want to go through is just the ability to apply business rules for more accurate quoting. We always hear people use the phrase, well, sales sold it, so now we have to make it work. CPQ lets you eliminate that, that fear and enforce what can be sold, so you end up with quotes that are accurate and executionable. CPQ also lets you streamline product configuration. So we have a lot of customers who come to us and they have engineering teams, or they have a few critical people who have been at the company forever and have tribal knowledge in order to get an accurate quote out the door. CPQ lets you take that knowledge kind of out of their brains and automate it into the system so that you can get quotes out quicker. That also enables a larger sales team because you don't have to have people who know every single little detail about how to engineer the product in order to sell it. Next, we've got the ability to generate standardized quote documents. All the time, it's Word documents, Excel spreadsheets and things that people have on their computers. Somebody's saved one off that they've always used. They update it for each sale and send it out the door. But when you do that, it's not only time consuming for the sales team, but you also miss the opportunity to push what's best for the business. So you miss out on things like promoting the best payment terms or the best contract lengths in those quotes because they're probably just going with whatever they quoted last time. So CPQ lets you make sure that you're including what the business would propose first in those standardized documents. And then the last one here is the ability to automate renewals and facilitate upgrades. People come to us a lot asking for a renewal process. The great thing about CPQ is that they already have one built into the product. And it's a really good one. It's what we would recommend building anyways. So it automatically creates renewal opportunities and quotes so that the management team gets the visibility that they need. And then it also takes the onus off of the sales team to keep up with getting that stuff entered into Salesforce as well. Now for some of the challenges with CPQ. As great as it is, it can be a little bit challenging to scale CPQ for different business units. So it's very customizable, but it's not always clear how to take the different customizations that you would need for each business unit and figure out how to apply them. So we're going to show you guys some of the tricks that we've done to get around that in the past. Next is building in the rules that you need while also allowing for flexibility. It's really easy to get carried away in the CPQ platform and build out all this logic for exactly how a sale should go, but it's a sales process, so it's never going to go perfectly. There's almost always an exception to the rule. So you want to choose wisely the rules that you're going to put in place that still allow for sales to get done what they need. And then the last thing here is change management. So I would say this is the biggest challenge that we see on our implementation, not only for the end users getting a new system, but also for the business team that's providing the requirements. There are a lot of decisions that need to be agreed upon that feed into the configuration of CPQ, and getting agreement on those items can be really time consuming. So you want to make sure you try to get ahead of that and make all of those decisions ahead of time. So just an example is every project pretty much wants deal approvals. but they haven't thought through what that approval authority would be. So now on to the optimization tips. So the first one we've got here is guided selling. So guided selling lets you optimize the search and product selection for each business unit. It helps enforce the product accuracy that the sales team is choosing while also giving them a really good user experience. So you're enforcing some logic, but they also feel like they're being helped with their opportunity and product selection. Next, we've got our different quote line views. This is something I would say we've done on every single implementation that we've done. It's the ability to change the CPQ user interface to the fields that matter most to that specific business unit. And it doesn't have to just be by business unit. You can also do it maybe based on sales process or kind of the area of product that they're selling. We do that a lot as well. Next are the use of custom actions. So this is just another feature that you can use to guide salespeople to what you need them to sell. And these can also be conditional, so you don't have to show it to every single user based on the user who logs in or based on the quote that they're doing. You can show them these custom actions that would apply to their sale. Next up, we've got approval formulas. So as I mentioned, change management is a challenge that we see a lot. Putting in some indicator of what approvals your team is going to need really helps ease that pain. So they may not have ever needed approvals in the past. Using some of these formulas we're going to show you, they'll be able to see as they build out their quote what approvals would be required. So it's less of a surprise for them. And if they can adjust it to not need approvals, they're more self-sufficient. Then the last thing on here is the idea of doing a crawl, walk, run implementation. So we recommend this for anything anyone does in Salesforce, but especially with CPQ. As I mentioned, there's so much you can do with the platform and so much you can build in that sometimes it can be a lot of change to try to get in at once. You could be working on this for almost a year as you try to build in all the different pieces of logic that you want to apply. But what we would recommend is trying to just introduce little features at a time that are going to help the sales team and kind of get them going on parts of CPQ before you maybe wait to finish every single little detail. So an example of that would be rolling out the quote object, letting them use it for product selection and for generating a quote document, but maybe waiting until phase 2 until they can put in discounts and submit those for approval and stuff like that. And we can talk about that a little bit more as you guys see kind of what Michael has built out in the demo. So I'm going to pause now and pass the screen over to Michael so he can show you some of these in action.
Thanks, Jenny. So hopefully you all can see my screen here. I have an opportunity pulled up, and in the top right of the opportunity, you should see 2 quick actions here. So I've got 2 different ones, one for a new hardware quote and then one for a new SOX quote. So in this example, our company basically has 2 different business units. They have a hardware business unit, which sells things like laptops, computers, keyboards, etc. And then we have a SOX division where all they sell is just SOX. So pretty distinct in what the products they're offering are. So let's get started with a new hardware quote. So we'll click our new hardware quote quick action. We've got some predefined fields here. We see that our quote type is set to hardware. So that will come into play a little further down the line. I'll go ahead and save this, and that should create our new quote. And it gives me a little notification here at the top. I can click the link here and that will take me into that new quote. So the next thing that I'd like to do now that I have my quote for hardware is I'd like to add some products to it. So to do that, we enter into the edit line screen by selecting this button. And so once that loads, it brings us into basically the line editor screen. And from here, we can start adding our products. So we'll go into the add products button here, and it immediately launches us into this guided selling process. And what we have are basically filters for the products that are geared specifically towards the hardware side of the business. So for this, I've got some options for my hardware type. So we can say we want to select a monitor. We're looking for a monitor to quote here. And then we can input like a monitor size. So we've got our minimum monitor size and our maximum. I'll say that my minimum monitor size is going to be 17.5 inches for the screen, and we can suggest that and see what options we get. I did not set a max, so it should just show me all monitors 17.5 inches and above. So I'll hit suggest, and that is the result we get. So we get a list of monitors 17.5 inches or greater. So we can select our 17.5 inch viewscape here, and I can hit select, and what that will do is add it to our quote line here and add it to the quote. So we've got some
Hey,
columns
Michael.
here. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to chime in on that really quickly. The guided selling that you showed, you saw he didn't fill in every single field, and that's something that that we see a lot. So that guided selling can be used both as a filter for your products, or if you want to go into a process where you kind of have them answer one question and the next questions are dependent on the last, you can do that as well. But we wanted to show you guys both options there.
Yep, and that's a great point. So yeah, so once you have that product added, you get returned back to this line editor screen where we can do things like increase our quantity for the product. We also see some columns here that are geared specifically towards the hardware division. Sorry, let me get back in there. I didn't mean to save that. Um, the other thing we've got added here is this filtering custom action called hot keyboards. So this was something Jenny had mentioned a little bit earlier. These custom actions are configurable in that we can make it conditional, so it only shows if based on a certain criteria, like a user is sysadmin or it's a sales manager, we can make this button show based on that criteria. But in this case, I'm just using it to filter down the hardware division in this company has the specific set of keyboards that they sell all the time. So they wanted basically a way to pull up those keyboards quickly and efficiently without having to mess with the filters and the guided action or the guided selling process all the time. They just wanted a quick way to get there. So what we did was we added this custom action. So if I click on hot keyboards, it's going to pull up the product selection screen. I can just click out of the guided selling process here, and we're presented with a list of basically those hot keyboards, those keyboards that the client or this company sells all the time. So I can just select my Clacky basic keyboard here, hit select, and we see those keyboard options are filled out. It's a mechanical keyboard, it's wired. Um, so just a cool little thing you can do to help add products to the quote a little faster. The other thing we have going on here is this approval required field, and we see that the flag is currently green, and we have a little note here that says approval required when net amount is greater than 1,000. So if we look at our net amount, we see that it's only $410, so we shouldn't be meeting that approval criteria. But if I were to like say increase the number of monitors here to 10, that should bring my net amount over $1,000. And what we should see is this approval required field, the flag should turn red. So once I hit calculate, we should see that that flag turns red, which it does. So that's just really helpful if maybe you've got a new approval process in place and people aren't quite sure about the criteria, whether it's going to require approval or not. But it's also helpful if a sales rep's in a rush to get a quote out the door and they don't want to have to deal with the approval process, then maybe they can just, increase their price a little bit to avoid that approval threshold so they can get that quote out and get that deal a little bit faster. Um, so let me save that, and I'll return back to my opportunity, and then we can talk about the socks quote. So we have this on the opportunity, we have the new socks quote quick action. So I can click that, and we see the main difference here is that our quote type is now set to socks instead of hardware. So I'll save that, and that will create my new socks quote. I can click on the link to bring me to it.
And Michael, while you do that, I just want to chime in on the quick action thing as well. It's not something that we mentioned as one of our tips, but it is something that we've started doing on a lot of our implementations that are in Lightning. So you can always use the standard new quote functionality from CPQ, but you'll see on this page there's a lot of stuff that was auto-populated. When you use that other standard button, it's kind of confusing for the end user to see all those fields as blank. So we like to use those quick actions just to show them only the ones that they need to fill in, and then everything else gets auto-populated in the background.
Yep. So just to get back to the quote here, so we're on our socks quote, so I can enter into edit lines here, and we can go from here to add products to add some of our socks products. And so what you'll notice is we're entered again directly into the guided selling process, but the filters are completely different. So this guided selling process is geared specifically towards the sock division, so we don't see anything about any of the hardware products. So we've got a sock size lower and a sock size upper, since the socks go in ranges. I believe they're from 8 to 12. So I'll say a minimum sock size of 8. And then for our style, I prefer the ankle socks, so we'll run with some ankle socks, and we'll suggest that. And so what we're brought back with is basically a list of matching socks. So we've got some men's black, men's navy, men's red, all ankle socks. And then if we look at the description, we see the size is 8 to 12. So those will definitely fit me. So I'll choose some of the black ankle socks. I'll select those and add them to my quote. And so what you'll notice now is that the columns on this screen are completely different from the hardware quote, and we're gearing specifically towards the sock division. So we've got our shoe size, what it'll fit, 8 to 12, our sock color, and then our ankle style, or our sock style, which is set as ankles. So to kind of go into a little bit about how the guided selling and how we're showing these different columns, I'll save that and I'll scroll down to the bottom of this quote. And so you've got two special fields here. We've got this quote process ID field. And so the quote process ID is actually the ID of the guided selling process that we're using. So when I created that new socks quote initially, in the background of that quick action, I'm setting this quote process ID to the guided selling process for the socks division. So that's where we're getting our filters from for when we're adding products in the socks division is from this quote process ID. And then the other thing we have going on is this edit lines field set name. This is a special field you can add into the quote object for CPQ. And basically it lets you return the name of a field set, and based on the name you return, it's going to show the fields that are inside of that field set. So what I've got is basically a formula that looks at the quote type. If the quote type is socks, then it returns the name of the field set socks here. And so that's where we're getting these columns that are showing up here. So just based on that formula field, we can basically control the columns that we're showing in that edit line screen. So that would complete the demo. So with that being said, I'll pass it back over to Jenny for any questions.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so we'll take any questions you guys have. We also have pulled up here just some of our information in case you want to get in touch with us after this, if you guys have any follow-up questions after this as well. So Linda, have we had any questions come through?
Yes, we do have a couple, Jenny, and feel free to continue sending in your questions through the question panel. We'll get to as many as we can. The first great question we have is from Max. The question is, how does the approval formula get into CPQ page?
That's a good question. So pretty much all throughout CPQ, anytime you see one of those custom screens that they have, those are all controlled through field sets. So there's actually a field set on the quote that just comes out of the box with CPQ, where you can adjust what fields you want to show in the line editor. So we put the approval formula there to show you guys that in the demo, but we use that a lot. You know, we'll put maybe the account name or the quote dates, things like that, that you want to make sure that your salespeople are still seeing as they work on their quote.
Great. Okay, and our next question is from Sandy. Can guided selling be optional?
It can be. So you can set it up so that it always takes them into that guided selling and they kind of have to use it, or they can just kind of click out of it right away. You can also have quotes that don't go into a guided selling process at all. So it really depends on getting that quote process ID populated on the quote to determine whether or not one of the guided selling maps are going to pull up.
Okay, great. And another question we have from Vanessa is, how long does CPQ implementation take?
So we typically see implementations take about 8 weeks. I think one of the things that takes up a good portion of that time is the discovery and the definition of those rules that are going to be put into place. After that, the configuration comes together pretty quickly.
Okay, great. And final question we have for the time we have allotted, and if you have other questions, feel free to send your questions to the email address noted on the slide, is how do you recommend a company prepare for an implementation?
I would recommend, this kind of goes back to that change management point that I made earlier. I'd recommend trying to get out ahead of that decision making that needs to be done. So if you want to enforce a lot of rules throughout CPQ, you need to make sure that you get those rules defined early and signed off on. We've had a number of implementations go through where they can't even decide on what the approval processes need to be until the last few weeks. So that really slows the team down. Trying to get out ahead of those decisions, you know, what are the approvals? What are the criteria to sort on? What rules would determine product dependencies or exclusions? And then what your quote documents need to look like. Those are a few of the key decision-making items that you could get out ahead of before you even get a partner involved.
Okay, great. So that looks to be all the time we have today. Everyone on the call will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Victoriam Solutions and our presenters, thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.